Welcome back to the show. Today we have Mike Fitzsimmons. He's the co-founder and CEO of Crosschq. Mike, welcome back to the show.
Hey, great to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you back on the show. I think what you guys are doing at Crosschq is really innovative and cool. But maybe before we get into that, let's get to know you a little bit better and start off with where you grew up.
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in a number of different places. I was actually born in Nashville, Tennessee, but as the son of immigrant parents who were moving all around, we moved a ton of different times. But I spent the majority of my upbringing outside of Boston, Massachusetts, and then in Richmond, Virginia. So East Coast of the country.
Cool. So walk us through, what did you take in university and why?
I went to a small liberal arts college and subsequently was a little limited in terms of the breadth and depth of the course offering. So as close as I could get to a business degree was economics, and that's what I majored in as an undergraduate.
Very cool. So you get out of university, walk us through your career up until coming up with the idea of Crosschq.
Yeah, for sure. So I was always a worker, and I ever since I could legally work, and even before that, I was always had some sort of a hustle, but was always a worker. And so sort of during college, I worked, and then every summer and every holiday break, I would work at a company called Circuit City, which at the time was sort of the largest consumer electronics retailer in the US and happened to be headquartered in Richmond, Virginia. So the company was a $12 billion company at the time. So anyway, I would work there in my summers in the call centers, doing collections and doing everything you could imagine. And then that was my first job out of college, was actually launching a new, or being part of a new division launch within Circuit City. So I worked there in the corporate setting for 4 years before I basically relocated to the Bay Area and Silicon Valley during kind of the initial dot-com run, to take a job with a e-commerce startup.
Very cool. Okay. So walk us through the rest of that journey up into coming up with the idea for CrossFit, and let's dive right into that.
Yeah, for sure. So getting that early exposure to Silicon Valley and the rapid growth and watching a startup scale. So that first startup that I became a member of, grew from 10 people to 100 people in, 5 minutes. It was one of those deals. And then we ultimately sold that company to CNET. And then it was after that that I actually started my first company. So the first company that I founded and ran was a company called Delivery Agent that was in the interactive commerce space. That company, it was a much longer journey for me. I ran that company for a decade. We got that company to a couple $100 million in revenue. We had over 450 employees. And basically part of that experience, I really learned the hard lessons around building teams and around how challenging it is to find great quality talent, but also how to retain and nurture and make sure you get the best out of that talent. So after exiting Delivery Agent, effectively, I was stewing on the idea for Crosschq, and really it was driven out of a couple of specific instances where I made a couple of questionable hiring decisions that had some consequences on the organization. And so that's how I kind of got there. Was, hey, gosh, started looking around and said, hey, there just aren't great tools for talent leaders to optimize the quality of their hiring decisions. And so learning that firsthand and feeling that firsthand, I'm like, we got to go fix this. And so that's where the idea for Crosschq came from.
Interesting. So how did you actually decide to go for it and start building Crosschq? Because sometimes it's hard. You come up with this idea and you're like, I wish somebody would build this. But how did you make the decision to say, like, you know what, maybe I should build that?
Yeah. So it's always fortuitous with these things. And one of the things that you certainly need is validation. And so, you do the social validation where you go out to your peers and people you respect and you're like, hey, what do you think of this idea? But the other thing that was important to me is my co-founder on Crosschq is a gentleman named Pete Gettner. And Pete was a serial entrepreneur and a venture capitalist for a number of years. Pete took his first company public on NASDAQ, which was an early SaaS e-learning company. And I remember sitting down with Pete and telling him what I was thinking about Crosschq. And he's like, I'm in, let's go do this. And I didn't have a co-founder in my prior 2 ventures. And so this was a good one. And I was excited to have a partner in crime. So ultimately it's that validation. And then you get the confidence, you say, let's go. Right. And so that was really the moment where I decided to go make a real run at it, was once Pete signed on board.
Very cool. So what exactly does Crosschq do, and how is it different than the traditional tools out there? Because I think that's where the real power is how you're different.
Yeah. So what do we do? So there's a, there's a little dirty secret in our companies, and that is that we're really bad at making hiring decisions, right? And so the public data says that 45% of new hires don't make it 18 months in their new job.
Which is
And we
wild,
can
right?
Pardon? Yeah, it's crazy.
That's
And
wild. Yeah.
so we know the costs of that, right? Not just the cost of replacing that talent. We know the costs on productivity and on culture if it doesn't work out. But we also know that it's really painful for talent themselves. And this is part of the overlooked part of this bad hire discussion is it's like, it really stinks. Like we all know it. We've been there. We've taken the wrong job. And as an individual and a human being, it's no good. So what we're trying to fix is this 45% problem, which is give the world better tools to make better hiring decisions, more diverse hiring decisions, and build winning teams. That's our mission in the world. So that at a headline level is how we measure success. So when we go into organizations, we measure our effectiveness by increasing the quality of their hire. The first thing that we had to go solve in terms of how we do it was helping companies measure the quality of hire. And this might seem dead obvious. If you have an industry and something that's so important as your talent, you would think that companies have their hands wrapped around how to measure the effectiveness of their hiring decisions. The reality is they don't. They're flying blind, and our talent leaders for so long have just been handcuffed because they have no way of measuring the quality of their hiring decisions. They've forever been incentivized by butts and seats, filling open job recs quickly, and really haven't had the tools and the ability to measure the ultimate quality and the output of those jobs that they fill. So that's the first thing that Crosschq does, is enables organizations to benchmark and analyze the quality of their hire. And that ultimately sets the table for all the other cool things that we do. But that's the starting point.
Okay, so walk us through a company signs up with Crosschq. Walk us through the journey of how they use it kind of day one, and then maybe a quarter or two later, because I think that's where the real power is you set like a benchmark, and then over time, obviously you collect data, you hire, and people come and go, and then that's the real power, correct? Or walk us through that journey.
Yeah, it is. And so we've trademarked this term, the talent intelligence cloud. And so when we walk into any organization, that's what we're telling them about, is building up effectively their talent intelligence cloud. And there's two key components to getting this off the ground on inning number one with a new customer. Now, one is aggregating all of the pre-hire data that they've had on prior hires that they have made. Now, this could be everything from, what was the source of that hire? Who was the recruiter? Who was the hiring manager? What was the interview score? What university did they go to? How many jobs have they had? You can imagine all the stuff we get pre-hire on these individuals, but the magic is in then connecting that with post-hire business outcomes. And that's where the world has just been really slow. So we're actually then taking that pre-hire data, and in our cloud, we're aggregating all of the post-hire data on that individual. This could be something as simple as tenure, which we're getting out of their HR system. This could be performance, like their performance rating. It could be changes to their compensation. We're also getting some other fascinating post-hire data around engagement. Are they a culture ad? There's all these other things you can think of when you think of quality, but that's the idea here, is finally connect in one cloud the pre-hire data with post-hire data and give this organization a sense of where they're starting. So what's our benchmark? What does our quality of hire look like at this point in time? And that's really phase one. And there's a whole bunch of different ways we can cut that analysis. Like I mentioned earlier, we can cut quality of hire based upon the source of the hire, based upon who was the recruiter, based upon every single way you could imagine. From a DE&I perspective, we can look at quality by age, ethnicity, and gender. But that really is phase one, is what do I look like right now? And how do I benchmark against the other competitors in my space? So we also offer the ability for them to look at their own quality of hire data against other like companies. So if you're in enterprise software, you just want to understand what that looks like. If you're in hospitality and retail, you want to understand what that looks like. So that really is phase one.
No, that's very cool. So how do you actually collect the data from the candidate and the company and the reference check? Because I think that part of Crosschq is actually really innovative as well.
Yeah, so once you have your hands wrapped around what our quality of hire is, right? So you're running the company and I got it. I understand this and I understand where I'm strong and where I'm weak and all that good stuff. But the next logical question is, so how do I make it better? Like, what can I do to make it better? And so one of the tools that Crosschq has rolled out is what we call a Crosschq 360. And the Crosschq 360 is effectively a reimagined version of a reference checking tool. The Crosschq 360 uses the cloud and uses AI, but effectively enables a job candidate to self-review and then have their references, i.e. their former coworkers, their former managers, customers even, also give feedback on them on the same dimensions that they have given feedback on themselves. And that is our Crosschq 360 product. So we effectively provide this pre-hire report to the company to make sure that this individual is someone we think is going to thrive in our organization. And it's really been fascinating to watch that product expand and become more successful and more impactful. But that's what we've done. So we've leveraged the cloud, we've leveraged mobile, we've leveraged AI and all this stuff to take a process that has been archaic and is super inefficient and turn it into something that's reliable, that's data driven, that removes bias and all that good stuff. That's the Crosschq 360.
Got you. Okay. So how does that, so I hire new people and I'm using Crosschq and, 6 months, 9 months, does it start creating profiles around what's a good hire, what's a bad hire, or walk us through what I start seeing after I've been using the product for a while?
Yeah, and that's the magic, as you mentioned. And so I started with the benchmarking and baselining your data and analytics, because if you don't do that to start with, you're never going to understand if you're making it better or not, right? So
Right.
what we've done that I think is so effective is now that we have the baselining analytics on quality of hire and we're getting your Crosschq 360 score, we can start to get highly predictive based upon the signals that we get out of the Crosschq 360 that are going to likely lead to you being a high quality hire at the organization. And so that's where the magic happens. That's where the machines get smarter every single day. We talk about machine learning and AI sometimes with sort of a level of, or we make it so mystical and complex that it overwhelms us. This is just right up the middle and should be easy for people to understand, right? If we understand, the data that leads to high quality, and now we have these tools that are giving us that data on our candidates before we hire, inevitably the machines are going to do their work. They're going to learn, they're going to get smarter, and that's going to ultimately influence the AI and the predictive side of the equation. So that's how it all kind of comes together and where the magic happens.
Interesting. Okay. So how do, like, as a hiring manager or whatnot at an organization, how do I, or what do I see and can I check on while I'm using Crosschq? Like, do I have like a dashboard, or walk us through kind of the interface and what I see and the journey along that?
So we've built an awesome UI and application that has really advanced dashboards and measurement and analytics, and we're getting really high marks on G2. We have an 86
Nice.
NPS. The customers that use the application directly love it, and it was really built with a modern sort of focus and a modern user focus. That said, we also have partnered really effectively with a number of the top applicant tracking systems and HR systems out there. So we all probably know Workday. We all probably know SAP as examples. So we're integrated into those platforms that many larger enterprises use, but we're also integrated into smaller platforms that other companies will use. Like there's a company called Greenhouse that's a leader in the applicant tracking space. Icems is another one. So you can access us both ways. You can either come directly into our application and use all of our great tools from our UI, or you can also use us directly from the workflow of your native HR system that you're working. We've got Slack integrations as well. You can just sort of imagine in the modern worker and the modern talent or recruiter, they're using all kinds of different tools. And our job is to not make them use a new tool necessarily unless they want to, but make it as easy as possible for them to use us from their existing systems.
Yeah, no, I think that's actually really good advice. And how did you make that call? Because I find so many times you talk to people and, or especially like entrepreneurs, and they're like, well, I don't want anybody to ever leave our app. It's like, sure, I understand that, but sometimes it's like they won't use their app unless you integrate with, or potentially just like store their data in your app and maybe go back to it every once in a while or weekly, but they'll use like Slack every day, which is interacting with your app. It's just they're not physically in your app. So how did you make that call?
Yeah, look, it's just an obvious one, at least in our space. I mean, one of the core tenets of our, so we, our big vision is to fix this quality of hire problem, and we have a lot of, that's the world and the big mission for our organization. But at a tactical level, these talent leaders and recruiters are really overwhelmed. They're busy in this job market. They're completely slammed. You have to be able to save them time, right? So anything that you do has to also have a core tenet of saving their time and making their lives easier. So that was a pretty obvious move for us to make, which was, they don't want to necessarily have to go learn a brand new system, and let's just make it as easy as possible to integrate with the system they currently have. And we did that from day one. So that was a pretty obvious one in our sector.
No, that makes a lot of sense. So I'm curious then, because you're collecting all this data over time, can you actually speed up the hiring process and go through candidates? Because right now there seems to be, especially in the tech industry, like you almost can't recruit people fast enough, right? Like there's companies that are hiring hundreds of people like today. And so how do you speed that up for them?
Yeah, so saving time, back to that, right?
Yeah.
If you think about the old process of doing a reference check on a candidate, and you're like, I'm trying to get 3 references, I have to make 6 phone calls, and I schedule this time, and I do this conversation, and on average, it takes between 6 and 8 hours just to do one candidate's one reference. In our system, that takes you less than 30 seconds, right? You're
Yeah.
literally
Wow.
just pressing a button in the system. So there's an obvious thing that sort of saves time and can help reduce friction in the process and kind of make it all happen faster and easier. I think the other way that we're actually helping talent leaders in this modern world is we've figured out a way to turn reference givers, the referees themselves, into members of a talent pool that the
Okay.
company can recruit from. So if Kevin was giving Mike a reference at the end of the process, it says, hey, Kevin, are you also interested in a job at HubSpot, one of our customers? And Kevin raises his hand and says, why, yes, I am. Good timing. I'm in market for a job. I'm interested in a new opportunity. HubSpot's a cool company. And now all of a sudden you become an active candidate for HubSpot to go recruit. So that's a really cool thing that we've built and is becoming more and more valuable in this job market. So we can turn sort of a process that historically took a lot of time and slowed you down to something that not only speeds you up, but also becomes a source of new talent, right? And so anything that can be a source of new talent, I think, has high value, especially in this market.
Sure. Well, and then Crosschq also helps an employer keep their employees happy. How do you guys do that? Because you can monitor based on data, correct?
Yeah, so I mean, a big part of what drives the Crosschq quality of hire analytics is getting this data on Kevin post-hire, right? So if you think about the employee life cycle, so we're starting as soon as 30 days after you have started to make sure that you're doing well. And we do this through various surveys that we can do both to you, to your managers. We're rolling out the ability to also do it to your peers post-hire, much like we do the Crosschq 360 pre-hire. And those can be set at different points in time, 30 days, 90 days, 180 days. Most companies don't even start doing performance reviews until maybe 6 months or 12 months after you're hired. And so what we are learning, especially in this market, is that, man, you got to get ahead of that. And one of the key things and reasons you have to get ahead of it, we just have a new module called early star detection, because we're seeing a rise in our companies on quick quits. And these are people that took a job in this market, but with the combination of remote work and the combination of this frothy job market, you might lose them sooner than you would have ordinarily. So you really have to be aware of who your top talent is and working really hard to retain them. So our early superstar detection, it's exactly what it's trying to do, which is, hey, Kevin's been here for 90 days and he is absolutely kicking butt. We love him. He's a culture ad. He's ahead of, on all these different metrics. You might not have seen that until you did a performance review, but potentially. So we're getting you that data sooner so you can act on it quicker. And I think that's a really important thing, we know if we can get our employees happy and excited through that first year, that first 18 months of employment, we've accomplished our goal, right? Which is to reduce this mishire problem. So that's how we're attacking it.
No, I think that's actually really good advice. And it's cool that you guys do that, because I think, like, just, obviously both of us being in tech, like that's got to be, I've heard a number of friends and say like, oh, I've only been here, but they're kind of always looking, right? And if you can make sure that you compensate them in ways that they stay motivated and want to stay at your company, that's super important. And I think the other thing, that's not always money. It could be a bunch of things, right? In your experience, is there anything that you've maybe seen or noticed, that patterns that maybe you'd recommend to any employers watching that would say, you know what, like, sure, obviously sometimes money works, but is there other perks or factors that you've seen that you could maybe recommend people do if they're not currently doing to their employees?
Yeah, I think you bring up such a good point, because we've studied this at great length. One of our advisors is a gentleman named Brooks Holtom, who's, I think,
Okay.
probably one of the top thinkers on retention analytics. And from the early days, you learn people don't leave the job just because of money. Now, certainly
Totally.
there's that is a part of it, but it's not the only part. And some of the old predictors, by the way, of churn and retention, like the distance you drive to your office, was a
Yep.
major one, right? Pre-remote work at this scale. Other ones were community embeddedness. And so I think that community embeddedness one is one that we as talent leaders have to be aware of, and how pronounced it is right now, because it is hard. It is hard in this remote work environment to ensure that our talent is embedded with our community, with our corporate culture and our corporate community, especially for younger talent, right? First job out of university, and they're like working from their parents' basement, and like, what the heck, they're not going out for burgers and beers with their coworkers on Wednesday nights or what have you. So I think that's a thing, right? It is,
Yeah.
we have to just continue to be extraordinarily creative. But the other thing that maybe is hard to hear, and our data is showing us, we also have to make sure that the culture of our companies matches the people we're hiring. And this might seem
Yeah.
simple, but we have one of our companies who's a massive unicorn. They've been remote from day one, and they've built a multi-billion-dollar company being remote from day one. And we did some very interesting quality of hire analytics. And one of the things that they realized is that if you are coming to their company and expecting to build up your social circle and make friends and do all that stuff that we do, this is not the company for you. So they actually had to start hiring, right, for folks that were more embedded in their local communities, a little further along in their careers, and just change their mindset on who was going to thrive in their organization versus not thrive. And so I think that is part of our recommendation through and through would be, make sure you're self-aware as an organization. Make sure you do the work, do the analysis to see who is thriving at your company and who is not thriving, and try to use those signals to get more people in the door that will thrive.
No, I think that's actually really good advice. And then obviously using the data to back up your assumptions, right? Because it's easy to guess, but when you actually can pull up the data and say, like, we lost 5 employees because of the same reason, maybe you need to actually look at that, right? Where if you didn't have the data, you might be able to guess why, or sometimes maybe employees will tell you, but it's way easier when you have the actual data, right?
For sure. And that's just where you learn, and we all learn. I think that I'll give you some other
Sure.
signal data. I think we mentioned this the last time we chatted, but we recently concluded an analysis, or a quality of hire analysis, one of our enterprise customers, and the learnings in this case of the correlation between their interview scores and their quality of hire, there was only a 9% correlation. So you're sitting there scratching your head saying, oh my gosh, they're not, there's nothing there. And not to go over the edge, we've all read reports that say interviews are not predictive. They're certainly not correlated, right? In terms of how we interview and who interviews well and who's a good talent scout and who's not a good talent scout. And I think that's the piece that I just back to, data, be aware, make sure you're analyzing your own history. So, in that case, what would you do differently? Well, have you been properly training your interviewers? Is that an L&D opportunity for you to train up your interview teams? Yep. Do you have people that are really good talent scouts that maybe you want to put them on more interview panels because Kevin doesn't miss, right? And when Kevin understands our culture so well and he can smell talent so well, so let's use him as much as possible. that sort of thing. So I think that is what, day to data, get your hands wrapped around the data, and then, use it as good signal to help you kind of run your companies a little bit better.
Sure. Well, and then it also probably cuts down the number of interviews you need. We all know historically some companies have many interviews, sometimes more than 10. It's like, well, if you can get it down to, it's saving everybody time, especially when the space is so hot right now and people are trying to recruit, right? Like good talent's not going to last 10 interviews. They're going to go somewhere else, or maybe your competition, right?
Yeah, I agree. And we had a policy here with 4 interviews was the max per panel. I think that was a Google policy that we knocked off. We've been playing with that and tinkering with that with our own quality hire and understanding what the right number is for us. But I'm with you. It's not more. I mean, there's definitely diminishing returns. There's plenty of studies out there that show you what that exact and precise number is. But as importantly, it's just how do you weigh the interview as part of your overall assessment? I think that's a big part of the conversation, right? Like it's not 90% of the decision. That's the challenge I think that many companies are having now, where they just don't have a really good and efficient way of kind of indexing all of that and being able to weigh it appropriately when they make these decisions.
Totally. And I also think too, the employee is kind of at more an advantage right now where they can maybe be a bit pickier. So where before, obviously, I think companies maybe had a bit more of that advantage, at least in certain industries, where I think it's kind of leveling out a little bit more. And I think, so if the sooner you can both figure out that it's going to work for a number of reasons, the better off both parties are, right? From the employee and the employer standpoint.
Well, and look, you need to understand internally when you get ROI positive on a new hire for whatever given job it is. So I'll give you an example. One of our large clients in the staffing space does massive, volume hiring for customer care centers, which we all know have historically had really crazy turnover. That their average term is 72 days. A win for them is if they get somebody 180 days, right? And so, but their ROI calc, I think, is 180. And so like, that's different than a software developer, which is also different from an enterprise salesperson. You go hire an enterprise salesperson in a software business, you don't really expect them to produce for, let's be real, because the sales cycles are what they are. It's at least a couple of quarters, if not more. And so I just think that's also important for us as we're compromising our decisions. Let's make sure that we're conscious of the expected ROI on that hire as well, so we can properly calibrate where we're going to take more risk and where we're going to not, right? Because the not part is it's tough when you get it wrong.
No, that makes a lot of sense, but sadly we're out of time. So how about we close with mentioning where people can get more information about Crosschq and any other links you want to mention?
Yeah, for sure. So crosschq.com, CROSS, but it's CHQ.com. So crosschq.com, and you can check us out on LinkedIn and whatnot, but the website is the best. And if anybody wants to hit me up directly, it's fitz@crosschq.com. So FITZ@crosschq.com. But thanks so much, Kevin.
Yeah, perfect. I, again, really appreciate you taking the time out of your day, and have a good rest of it. And we'll talk soon.
Take it easy. Bye.
All right. Okay. Bye.